Good morning, everyone. I will now call the hearing to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. This morning, I will be chairing the hearing. My name is Robert Hutchings. On my far left is Mr. McPherson. On my direct left is Ms. McFadden. Our secretary today is Ms. Rojo. And the assessor today will be Tricia Caldwell. Beginning, and then Matthew Baracus later, I guess. Yeah. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that the applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by this Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed further to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by cross-examination again. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and makes its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. And could everybody please put their cell phones on silent during the hearing today? First property on the docket today is file number 19-24. It's a BA assessment for 1555 Inkster Boulevard for the year 2018. Could you swear the assessor, please?
Please state your full name. Tricia. And your firm the evidence you represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Caldwell.
Good morning. Okay, our first property is, the address is 1555 Inkster Boulevard. The business roll number is 54323. This is a tenant, it's Sweetland Company. We have a total ARV of $123,240. They occupy, single storage warehouse. We have them assessed for 13,252 square feet plus full occupancy. The base rent is a table rent at $695, plus added with the total occupancy cost brings us to the ARV of $123,240. I have a recommendation for this property. After speaking with the tenant, we learned that we have been assessing them for too much space. On pages 5 through 12, I've attached a copy of the lease. They actually only occupy 10,000 square feet, and there is no air conditioning. It's a building, there's a storage warehouse in the back, and there's an office space in the front, and they don't use the office portion. In fact, it's been rented out since then. So they occupy 10,000 square feet and their lease rate is $6. So my recommendation, after correcting the area, I could have just corrected the area, but I'd like to also override the table rate to $6, which, looking at the comparables, falls right in here. So on the last page of my brief, I have the new workup. On the left table is the original with 13,252 square feet at $6.95. After adjusting for the area of 10,000 square feet and removing the air conditioning and applying a rate of $6, we have a new ARV of $80,280. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Stu, any questions of the assessor?
Yeah, just some clarification there, please. So originally, you said it was 13,252.
Yeah.
Did that include the office area?
Yes.
Okay,
It is
and
the-
so that
the entire building.
3252 difference is, the business assessment is charged to a different tenant?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
No questions.
My only question, Trish, is, and you spoke with the property owner and they're in agreement with the recommendation for correcting the square foot? And-
I did, I was emailing back and forth with the tenant. After I presented these numbers, she actually didn't get back to me.
Okay.
So whether or not she was in agreement, I'm
Yeah,
not
fair
sure.
enough. Okay, yeah, maybe, in their apps, or in their absence, I'm just wondering
Right.
if they knew what was coming.
Yes.
Obviously, you notified them. Okay.
Yes.
All right, and the new value for business assessment is $80,280, and that's for the year 2018, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. No more questions, I guess, so that concludes 1555 Inkster Boulevard. Leave it with us. Thank you. Now we've got a new assessor, do we? Okay.
And you swear the evidence about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please state your full name. And you affirm the evidence about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Barocas, Mr. Reimer. Next property in the docket, I guess, is we've got file number 1925 and 1926, 2000 St. Mary's Road. We've got a realty assessment for 2018, linked to file 1925, and a realty assessment appeal for 2019, file number 1926, also for 2000 St. Mary's Road. So, Mr. Barocas, can we start with 2018, please?
Well, they're both the same adjustment,
Okay.
so is it okay if we deal with them at the same time?
Um,
The vacancy.
Yeah, I believe the evidence is identical in both cases, so if you want to just hear the evidence and
Okay.
apply your findings to both, that makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reimer. And I know there's a recommendation on the property, and Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
No.
Okay, so, okay. All right, Mr. Barocas, please, when you're ready.
Okay, roll number 0802113300 St. Mary's Road. Multi-phase apartment building, South St. Mary's area. First phase was built in 2014, second phase was built 2018. Total number of suites on the first page should be amended to 425. When I had originally gone out and inspected the place, and came back with the rent roll, I had miscounted. So, the sup was to bring the suite count up to 425. Not 427, 406 indoor parking, 80 outdoor parking spots on this one. Oh, here it is. So the recommendation, basically, if you go to page 3, it shows the original assessment at 427, the model rent of 1493, brought down to 425 units. Just glancing ahead to Mr. Reimer's brief, we're in agreement in terms of rent and expense. He had confirmed with me yesterday by email that 425 is the correct unit count. So, what we're talking about here mainly is the vacancy. Model vacancy was applied to this property, which is 2.8. When I went out there and took a look at the property and was corresponding with the property manager, if you turn to page 18, you'll see there's part of an email conversation that I had with the property manager going back to May of 2018. So phase 6 and 7, which is the 111 units that were put onto the property. He was confirming that there were still 21 vacancies of the 111 units at the time in May. That's of the new phase though. That's not in regards to the building as a whole. And then speaking with him further, at the time of inspection, he had confirmed by September of 2018 that all the units in the new phase were filled up.
Mr. Chairman, where's this evidence?
I'm just saying that verbally. That's what I spoke with.
Okay, well, I haven't objected so far as to the post-reference nature of it, but I'm getting a little concerned. Let that noted for the record.
Okay. So basically, occupancy was issued April 11th, 2018. So the reference date we're looking at for 18-19 is April 1st, 2016. So there's no way, so if we're looking at the economic environment, April 1st, 2016, but the physical asset, 2018, well, the thing wasn't even completed then. It took them only, less than 6 months to fill this place up. Looking at past phases as well. Phase 1 started occupancy in 2013. Phase 2 started occupancy in 2014. The 2015 income and expense mailer indicated, well, it wasn't clear exactly, there was a bit of discrepancy. Mr. Reimer is saying 8%. In my workup, I think I had 9.4. Basically, this place is in the process of leasing up. So, third phase. Phase 3 started occupancy July of 2015. As of March 2016, 43 out of 44 units were rented. Phase 4 started occupancy in 2016. In February 2016, 22 of 52 units were rented, but of April 1st, 2016, the reference date, only 3 units were left to rent in Phase 4. So it had 49 of 52 rented leading up to the reference date for the new phases at that time that were being put on. Now, this is all internal in our notes from Patricia who put on the previous phase back in March of 2016. So it looks like the behavior of the previous phases prior to the reference date, which we're looking at, shows that there is good demand for this property and doesn't take that long to rent up. So anyone who's gonna have the means to borrow $86 million to rent a place is gonna be, I would say, forthright enough to know, looking at the previous phases leading up to the reference date we are looking at, that it doesn't take them too much time to lease the place up. And they're not gonna use a lease-up vacancy going forward in determining their valuation. So I can say that again, Phase 3 started occupancy in July 2015. As of March 2016, 43 of 44 units were rented. Phase 4 started occupancy in February 2016. As of April 1st, 2016, only 3 units were left to rent. So I had 49 out of 52 rented. Everything else we're the same on, cap rate, expense ratio, and rent. So model 2.8 vacancy is appropriate based on the behavior of the previous phases. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the evidence presented by the assessor?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. So, Mr. Rokas, you, on the cover page of the brief, the department's got the first building is built in 14, but we're agreeing then that in fact the Phase 1, which was the first building, occupancy was starting in October of 13, correct? I think you went back and you said the first building was finished in 13.
Phase 1 occupancy 13, Phase 2 occupancy 2014.
Right, okay, so we've got, we're agreeing that October 13 was when occupancy started for Phase 1.
For Phase 1, that's
March
correct.
14 started for Phase 2, right?
April.
I have March 14, but sure, we'll go with April, I'm fine with that. Now, you mentioned though, in your most recent comments, that Phase 3 and 4, which were in 2015 and early 2016, you said there was only 4 units vacant. That information, where is your evidence concerning that information? And the reason I ask, I'll tell you now, is when we go through my materials, the written information that and the rental that I obtained from the owner as of March 1 indicates a very, very different vacancy rate. So is that in your notes, or do you have a rental as of April 1, 14 that I'm not aware of? Or?
That's in the notes from the assessor who went out and inspected the place.
I'm going to suggest, Mr. Rokas, those notes are misplaced as to what was actually occupied as of April 1, 14, and I'll put that to you, and I'll go through that in my evidence with the rent roll. With respect to the property and the valuation, so, and you've mentioned this, the valuation, saving except for the rent, the valuation is to vacancy and expense allowances cap rate. Those are all model parameters, correct?
That is correct.
And so what would the model rent have been for the subject? Would it have been lower?
Well, the rent we have is $1493.65.
Oh, I understand what you've used, but was that an override of a model rent?
Oh, yeah, right, I did override that.
Okay. What would the model rent have been?
I actually don't know.
Okay. Could I ask you please, and board members, to turn on, I think we've got to page,
So are we going to, are we referring to two different?
well, no, the material, sorry, I was looking at is, I have my notes on the 18, or 19 briefs exactly the same, so that's why I'm reaching for the 18. Could I ask the board members and Mr. Brokus, if you could turn to page 4, please.
Of his brief, sorry?
Yeah, his brief, page 4. So Mr. Brokus, with respect to the rent, and you're right, it's not a dispute, but this, I'm gonna suggest you goes to rent, hence the need, or to risk, and hence the reason for my questioning. Now, the rent for the subject works out, and you've got the, as a proxy sort of for the average areas, you've got gross floor area per unit, which is the fourth last row from the bottom. So for the subject, that is $1493.65, which is what the department's applied based on 1,139 square feet-ish, correct?
That's, yeah, gross floor area per unit.
Yeah, so, and that, as I say, that seems to be sort of a proxy for the average unit size in the building, presumably. So that's $1.31 a square foot. Would you agree with that? And if you have, you're free to do the calculation.
Well, that's
if you
gross
want.
floor per area and not average.
I understand,
unit size.
I understand. But the gross floor area per foot would act as a, assuming there isn't an inordinate amount of common areas or a very poorly constructed building, that would act as a proxy for average unit size, would it not? I'm suggesting.
In comparison to the other properties that are displayed here that are calculated the same way on a grade gross
Yeah.
area per unit.
Yeah, okay. So ours is at $1.31 a foot. Now, the remainder of the comparables that you've got there range from a low of $1.12 a foot for Pembina, up to the highest would be 800 Dovercourt Drive at $1.28 a foot, but the other three are at $1.12, $1.15, and $1.17. Were you familiar with those calculations?
That wasn't a consideration.
Okay, fair enough. I'm suggesting to you what the numbers are. Now, here's the crux of the issue, and you're right, I've framed the issue in terms of vacancy, but fundamentally, Mr. Brokus, at the end of the day, when we're doing an income valuation, as we are here, we have to reflect the risk to the income stream of the property, and either or both, there's two different ways you can do it. You can either reflect risk in vacancy, or you can reflect risk in cap rate. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so the department, though, appears to have applied this very high rent, and granted, I understand you were looking at what was happening in 15, but that rent that's been applied, and that we don't disagree with, that certainly is a premium rent, even relative to the comparables you've got, correct?
I wouldn't say so.
I would suggest that more than close to 12 to 15% higher than all the other comparables. I'd suggest it is.
Well, it's newer. They don't have any problem renting the place up.
Well, we're going to talk about that as well. So you've made that statement, but I'd suggest to you it's not quite as clear cut as you're suggesting. So now, with respect to then, and you don't know what the model is, so the department, though, at the end of the day, is choosing to apply this rent that's demonstrably higher than even the other newer comparables in the area, and applying still, they're not accounting in any way either through vacancy or cap rate for the risk to the income stream due to the much higher rents being charged for these units, correct? 5% is a standard rate and 2.8% is a standard model rate, correct?
Okay, sorry, could you say that again?
The department has applied model parameters, so hasn't factored in any elements of additional risk for the very high income stream. They've still applied the 2.8% and the 5% cap, 2.8% vacancy and 5% cap, and those are simply the model parameters, correct? Without reflecting any additional risk.
The cap and vacancy are, the rent was overridden based on the rent roll that was submitted
Yeah,
to
I
us,
understand.
and then we took what was submitted, being post-reference, and then factored it backwards, so it's lower to reflect the time earlier as in the reference period we're looking at. So, saying that it's demonstrably high is inaccurate.
No, actually, relative to your comparables, it's extremely accurate.
Well, sometimes the subject property is, you know, onto its own.
And competing in the marketplace, you'd agree with that? This property is not being operated in isolation.
No, of course not, but there seems to have no problem filling it up.
Well, let's discuss that. So, could I ask the board and Mr. Brokus if you could turn to page 12? So the average percent, and I appreciate your forthright answer concerning the vacancy, you actually calculated a vacancy that's a little bit higher, but the average percentage vacancy at with this property in 2015 was 8%, correct? That's what they reported.
That's what they reported, but when you take the potential gross reported and then you compare it, that's why I came up with the 9. You have 8.
Sure, yeah.
So 8, 9, it's higher than what our
Right.
model is saying during the lease out period.
But to be clear, again, and this is a key point when we're talking about the risk, the vacancy risk. This isn't a case where the building was just completed a couple months prior. This is a case where the phase 1, which is over 100 units, was, as of the reference date, had been in existence for coming on 3 years, and where phase 2 had been in existence for coming on, call it 10 months. No, actually, sorry, that's not right, it's 14, so coming on about 22 months. It's not like we're talking about a couple of months in terms of the lease-up period, we're talking about over a year in each case, and in one case over 2 years.
Well, what I have is phase 4, started occupancy in 2016.
Yeah,
That's
no,
a 50, that's 52 units.
We'll talk about phases 3 and 4 and your notes in a couple of minutes relative to the evidence I've got, but in terms of the information that was submitted, the 8% vacancy, which you calculate properly so is 9%, we're agreeing, if you recall, that phase 1, which is 100, I'll get the exact number here. It's 102. Sorry, it's 114 units. So the 114 units in phase 1, the occupancy of phase 1 started in October of 13, correct?
Yes.
So that was fully 2 years and 5 months prior to the reference date. And phase 2, which is I'm sorry, 114 is not right, it's 102 units. Phase 1 is 102 units. Phase 2, which is 60 units, that started in July 14, correct? Which we had mentioned earlier.
July, we have June, July, like around that
Yeah,
time.
yeah, okay. So, in fact, the 8 to 9%, and you're saying the lease-up period, but this 8%, 8 to 9%, represents leasing efforts for a significant number of units over the span of upwards, on average, I'm going to suggest to you of roughly 30 months, call it 28 to 30 months. Between phases 1 and 2.
Between phase 1 and the reference date?
Between phase 1 and 2 and the reference date.
Phase 1 and 2.
Recall that phase
and-
1 occupancy started in October of 13.
Yeah,
Phase
yeah.
2 in July of 14.
If we're counting months, yeah.
Okay. So, you know what, that's going to be my questions, Mr. Chairman. I'll have much more to say in terms of the evidence relative to some of Mr. Roca's comments when I go through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Any questions of the assessor?
This information on page, I can't even tell what page that is, 12. That reflects then phase 1 and phase 2, the actual financials for phase 1 and phase 2. Am I correct there?
Yes.
Because phase 3 and phase 4 weren't leasing at that point. Since it's 2015.
Well, it says phase 3 started occupancy in 2015, but that, according to our notes, that would be phase 1 and 2
Yeah.
from 13, and 14 respectively. And then phase 3, starting occupancy, we have in July of 2000.
So this is 12 months ending July of 2015.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Stu, any-
Or actually, it says 12 months ending, what they reported on the top, pardon me, July 31st, 2015. Usually they do December, so it's July. Yeah.
Correct, but, so phase 3 hasn't started, that was just starting at that point,
Correct, yeah.
That's what I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
Stu, any questions?
Yeah, it's a couple, page 4, where you've got your comparables. Your last, I guess at the bottom of the page, heat and rent. Does the subject include the heat and the rent?
I believe they do, let me check my notes.
If you don't have that answer, Mr. Brokus, I can help you.
I guess,
Yeah, if you got the answer.
It is including the rent.
and
We're
we're
including the heat.
including the,
No.
but did I hear earlier that the expenses are not in contention? No, they're not.
They're not in contention.
Okay, then I have no further questions on that, but just another clarification is on page 12. And I know you were referring to the 8% vacancy that the owner or manager reported. They also reported a total leasable area of 148,010 square feet. And I look on page 1 and I see a plan area of 124,564 and a basement area of 127,634. How does this relate as far as, is that just, that's not the lot size, I'm assuming, because the land area is 489. So how does that relate, the 148? Is that 3 phases? Is that, and what you report on page 1 is only 2 phases?
Well, they reported the area that they're leasing, which I'm assuming,
Or you think that's the total of their suites that they're listing?
I think they did their, I'm not sure how they came up with their number, I can't speculate.
Okay,
on
okay. I just wondered if you had looked at that, and
No.
it wasn't a consideration in your
No.
evaluation. That's my questions, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Brokus, where's the location, 2000 St. Mary's Road?
I think it's just north of Wilkes, south and down St. Mary's, close to the Van Hall area.
Oh, yeah. Did you say Wilkes? Ward.
Ward, pardon me.
Yeah.
Ward, okay,
not Wilkes.
so we're south, okay.
Yeah.
And the reason we're here today is because the department issued a supplementary assessment, and the current physical condition of this property is 4 phases, and that's what you're assessing?
Well, the current, no, it's 7 phases. The
7, okay.
425 units.
Okay, so we've got 7 phases, so this assessment is dealing with a supplementary assessment that's reflecting the completion of the project.
Yeah.
Okay, so this discussion about what was phase 1 and phase 2 and income and everything is, in my opinion, kind of irrelevant, because we're dealing with the complete property in its physical condition.
Yeah,
Is that
well-
right?
I don't agree with that, but I'll comment
I
on
mean-
that in due course.
Okay,
I think what Carrie and I, well, what I was trying to say and what Carrie was questioning me about is that if we're looking at the April reference date, we're arguing about vacancy, right? So we're looking at the past behavior of the pace of the past phases pre-reference date
okay,
to lease up.
okay,
We're looking at what sort of post-reference, or at the reference date rather,
right.
vacancy rate should be applied to the property final phases that were completed post-reference.
Okay, but the assessment is reflecting a completed.
The property is completed.
Okay, and so the argument is that there should be a further allowance for vacancy as opposed to what the assessor is applying.
Not quite, but I'll explain in a minute.
Okay, okay. And what are the actual rents on, are there 1 and 2 bedroom units in the property? And what are the actual rents being charged?
Well, that would be post-reference.
I can help Mr. Brokus if you might.
How about the ones that were
Exactly.
before? Is there any notes from the assessor?
Well, I know Carrie's got a rent roll,
Your page 11.
and page 11 here shows what they're reporting
Okay.
for 2015. And so if you look at my page 5, what I did is I took that and then I calculated what they're actually getting on a weighted average. I got 1481 because we're looking at 2016. I just gave it a rent control bump, and you'll see that the model rent and the rent with the 1.1 rent control bump is highly similar, and even the weighted average rent 2015 is highly similar to our model rent.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
may I have a follow-up to
Of
that?
course.
You used a bump for rent control. Does rent control apply to this type of property?
No, it would be newer, but they could do whatever they want with the rent.
Okay.
So no, then it wouldn't because it's a newer property.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so that's all my questions. All right, Mr. Reimer, I think because these are 2 separate appeals, we're gonna deal with 2018 and then we'll make a statement.
Carry forward,
Yeah, okay,
Absolutely, absolutely.
just for the record.
So, agreeing with Mr. Brokus as to Mr. McPherson's question that the rent control wouldn't be in place because it's a new building, but what would certainly, without question, limit any rent increases in this place is the market, and that's my whole point. There are market conditions here that, here's the crux of it, and I'm gonna go through all of this in some detail. These units were constructed and the rents being charged were at the, I'm gonna suggest to this board, at the absolute upper end of what the market would tolerate, and what comes with that is increased risk. I've chosen to reflect the risk in a vacancy allowance, and there was, it's not quite as simple as what Mr. Brokus has suggested it was as far as vacancy. One could also, and might recall my question regarding the market parameters, the difficulty we've got with it is you're applying a rent that is at best at the very, very top end with a premium market rent while using the same parameters that reflect a normal amount of risk, and that's just not, those don't fit together. One has to account for an elevated risk when one is applying a rent premium as they are here. So this location, I believe the question came up in the location, it's at the corner of St. Mary's and Ward. So if you know the Tim Hortons, right at the south end of St. Mary's, about a 2-minute drive from the perimeter, that's where this is. Constructed over 7 phases, started, as I say, the construction actually started in late 2012. Occupancy, phase 1 started October 13, phase 2 of 14, and then the further phases went from there. This board has, and by the way, I am agreeing, I double-checked when I got Mr. Brooks' materials, I double-checked with our client, because I also had initially 427 suites, and our owner has confirmed that it is 425 suites, and I will give you the precise suite mix so that you can update or have that information. So there are 301 2-bedroom units, and there are 124 1-bedroom units. That is the entire completed project. Now, Mr. Hutchings had wondered about the sort of the income and expenses as of the reference date and how they might be relevant to the current project. Actually, Mr. Chairman, I'd suggest they are entirely relevant because it's reflecting what we've got to do is take this completed project, 7 phases, 7 different buildings, and basically put it down into the market conditions as of April 1/16. And all of my questions and all of my comments so far about risk relate to those market conditions. And the reason they relate to those market conditions is a reflection of the premium rent that's being charged for it. So, before I actually get into my valuation, I do want to briefly take you back, and there was a reason I suggested, actually, Mr. Brooks, the department's data is consistent with what I would have thought as far as the rent being charged here relative to other new properties in the south end of the city. So on page 4 of Mr. Brooks' brief, he's got the rent comparables, and recall that the average monthly rent per unit is there, and the gross floor area per unit representing, as I suggested, a proxy for the average unit sizes. So if the board, and the board's free to do the math, which I've done, but if the board could make a note of the comparables, when we're talking about a rent per square foot, $32.99 Pembina, the rent per square foot, it averages $1.12. 70 Bison, the rent averages $1.15. 800 Dovercourt, by far and away the closest in terms of rent per square foot to the subject, is $1.28. And 100 Paget, the rent is $1.17. Now, the rent for the subject averages at $1.31, much higher than any of those comps, save and except for Dovercourt. And the Dovercourt also appears to reflect a premium in the rent. So when you've got a market conditions like this, and Winnipeggers are notorious for trying to get as good a deal as they can, and the uptake on these suites and the sustainability of that kind of premium market rent, it would certainly, in my view, require an elevated risk, a recognition of elevated risk, either through vacancy, which is what I've done, or cap, and I'll go through that in a few minutes as well. Now, if we start on, go to my brief on page 11, and Mr. Brocas had this in his materials as well. Just as a quick comment, and I don't presume to know where the question had arisen about the plan area shown on the department suite of 124,000. I can only assume that was, that obviously is very wrong. The gross floor area for the completed phase is upwards of 300,000 feet, so I'm gonna ask the board to just, that doesn't bear any relation to what we're assessing here today. On page 11, the average percentage of space vacant as of the date of this return was 8%, and that reflects, as I say, the leasing efforts starting in occupancy starting in phase 1, which was 102 units in October 13, and then phase 2 in July 14. Now, the concern I had, and I've attached the rent roll material, starting at pages 16 and continuing on, but what I really want to just go through with the board, because I believe the department's notes concerning phases 3 and 4 are incorrect. If one starts at page 19 of our materials, this specifically is a rent roll for just phases 3 and 4, and the date of this rent roll is March 1, 2016. So what I heard Mr. Brocas saying, I don't remember the exact number, but the notes that he had on file, and this is not a reflection on Mr. Brocas, this is a reflection of perhaps note-taking and timelines getting a bit mixed up, but the notes he seems to have indicated a very, very high, only a couple of units vacant as of April 1 of 16. That is not the case. When starting at page 19, you see, and I've attached all the pages, but you'll see for the units that are occupied, I've blacklined them, so the tenant names are not there. But for the vacant units, I've kept them showing on the face of the rent roll so the board could determine for itself the units that were vacant. And as one goes through these materials and the pages of the rent roll, you can see there are several vacancies throughout phases 3 and 4, and the calculation that I have as of March 1 of 16 for those units, I've got the number in my brief here. There was, in phases 3 and 4, there was 33 vacant units. That's 50% of for just, not the first 2 phases, but for those 2 phases. So the concern that we've got is that any prudent purchaser in the economic conditions of the reference date, April 1 of 16, is certainly, the pricing of the suites is aggressive. They are at the top end, and there's a premium that they are asking to be paid. Lease up, and I'm not asking for 15 or 20 or 25% vacancy rate, which truly would reflect a lease up condition. That's not our request. But demonstrably, as of the reference date, the vacancy would have been all of 8%, if not higher still, based on phases 3 and 4. And it, as of the 2015 reported information, the vacancy for phases 1 and 2, recalling that those have been in place for some time, especially phase 1, was still at 8%. So what we're suggesting in the context of all of this information, if one turns now to page 7 of our materials, what we're suggesting is a vacancy allowance, a stabilized vacancy allowance of 8%. That, in our opinion, reflects the premium to, if one is going to continue to demand that higher rental rate, that reflects the risk with the premiums in these rents, and would result in a value of $82,255,000. Now, you recall my earlier question of Mr. Brokus that in an income valuation, there are actually two different ways one might reflect risk. One is in the vacancy, which is what I've done. The other is in the cap rate. So if one is not inclined, if one's inclined to use just a simple market vacancy, which wouldn't reflect, in my opinion, the premiums that are being asked of these units. So if one applies the 2.8% and you apply the NOI of the assessor, but you reflect that increased risk in a very small, increase in cap rate from 5% to 5.25%, that figure is $82,378,000. So either way, we're talking about a value range in the 82.2 to 82.4 million range. And either of those methods, I think, would be acceptable, but to use model parameters based on simple market parameters, without and then at the same time using the very, very aggressive rents that are being charged or being asked for these units, that, I believe, doesn't fit together well at all. So for all of these reasons, this morning, Mr. Chairman, we're asking the reduction in the 2018 assessment to $82,255,000, or in the alternative to $82,378,000 if one chooses to apply the risk factor in the cap rate at 5.25% using the assessor's NOI. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Any questions of the appellant for the 2018 uplift?
Yeah. Okay, so. So we're dealing with the property physically as completed right now.
Absolutely.
Do you see any effect in regards to the pace that phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 rented up, being surrounded by the construction of the other phases? Do you see that as a negative?
The construction would have been a negative, but certainly, and I don't disagree with that, but it wouldn't result in a vacancy rate going from market to 8%. That's a function of the rent.
But the calculation, the actual calculation of 8% would include someone interested in the units perhaps saying, maybe we'll wait till it's finished.
I agree it's possible. It wouldn't be a huge factor, in my opinion, but I agree you don't want to be looking out at a construction site.
Yeah.
But recall the way they're oriented. Okay? If you recall the way the phases are oriented, there's only a limited number of units that would have been facing into that construction.
But there still would have been traffic going in and out, mud, workers.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Smell, sound, etc.
Well, not smell, but sound, certainly.
It would seem that now that it's been completed, that it is renting up faster than it was
That's
previously.
post reference, and actually, if one looks at the situation with your evidence and ours, the vacancy rate would be 7%. So if we're talking about post reference, it went from 8 to 7.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Stu, any questions of the appellant?
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. First, simply because you mentioned it in your presentation, page 4 of the assessor's brief.
Yes.
You're talking the monthly rent, and I think your comparison that you drew was per square foot of the gross floor per unit.
Yeah, representing the proxy.
And what is the gross floor per unit in your understanding?
Oh,
What does that reflect?
It's 1139. So
What does that
that's-
reflect?
So that's going to reflect the gross floor area divided by the number of units, which will of course include the common areas like the hallways, and there is a single guest suite in this and a common room. But it's not that it's including gymnasiums and, skewing it in any way. And I believe all of these buildings with a lot of these newer apartment buildings have those kind of amenities, and also an exercise room, the common room for people to get together and have gatherings if they want to, and a guest suite. I have assumed, and I believe it would be correct, that the comparables would have something similar to it, and Paget I am familiar with, which would have something similar to it, but not hugely different ratios that would skew the numbers.
Okay. And on yours. So your position is one of two. There should be a reflection of the vacancy, because you say there's high rent, so there's a higher risk in that. So to reflect it on a vacancy rate, or the alternative is reflected on the cap rate.
Exactly, reflect the risk in one of two ways, one of those two options, not both, but one of those two in this case.
Okay, but you're taking into consideration that there's a lease-up period as well?
Absolutely. If I wasn't, I'd be looking at something closer to 15 or 20%, and that's not what I'm doing as far as the vacancy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
I have no further questions.
Okay. Mr. Reimer, on page 3 of the assessor's presentation, page 7 of yours, you seem to be accepting the model rent as potential.
I am accepting it as the premium rent, but absolutely, Mr. Brooks' calculations are, I have no issue with that.
Okay.
I just have an issue with what it means as far as the market.
And so we've got a blend of 30% one bedroom, 60 for 70, or well, 65-35, I guess, for two bedroom ratio. Parking income, I noticed on the rent roll, is that accounted for anywhere?
In the department's methodology, Mr. Brooks, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the department's methodology, I believe that that rent is a reflection of the total income for the total project, which would by definition include the parking.
Yeah, okay.
So that's, again, I'm accepting the top line, which would include the parking also for that matter.
Okay.
Well, there's no laundry revenue because there's in-suite laundry needs,
Yeah,
but similar
okay.
kinds of things.
Okay, and the tenants pay their own electric?
Actually, I know heat is included. I think electric's included as well.
What kind of heat is it? Each unit has their own forced air units, so the electricity is probably paid by the tenants, I suppose.
I thought it was all utilities that were included in this.
Okay. But you're not sure?
Included in the rent is hydro, heat, and water.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. So that's consistent with what I thought.
Okay. All right. Well, that's my only questions there. Any requirement for summary for 2018, sir? Mr. Reimer? Okay.
But I asked that that be carried forward to 19.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, for the record, read out the 2019 and we'll establish a hearing for it. Okay, that concludes the 2018 appeal on 2000 St. Mary's Road. Next property is 2000 St. Mary's Road, file number 19-26 for the 2019 year. Mr. Brooks, would you mind, for the record, just making a quick summary?
It's
very brief.
Yeah, 2019. Same roll number as we just discussed, same questions, same issues. There's nothing else to
Okay.
talk about.
All right.
I agree with that.
All right, Mr. Reimer, any questions by the board at all for 2019? Okay. Okay, that concludes the hearing for
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
2019. Thank you very much. That concludes our hearing for today.